Ellen White Reconsidered, a series of presentations for people who have questions about Ellen White's writings. Today our video is an excerpt from Ellen White, Can Her Writings Be Trusted? This was a conversation with Michael Mira. Welcome to our program. We're going to excerpt from a program that Michael Mira Ministries put out just this week, where he interviewed me about some subjects having to do with Ellen White's writings and whether they're trustworthy. I hope that you enjoy it, and if you do, there is a link to the fuller video.
Yeah, are there any challenges you think opponents have an upper hand in going after Ellen White, and what are the best answers to those questions?
And I think the most fundamental one is the concept of inspiration.
Okay.
That's where Adventists and non-Adventists alike stumble, because they have their own idea of how inspiration works, but they haven't really studied carefully how the Bible is put together, which is, we consider, the absolute most inspired book, right?
Yeah.
So if we study the Bible, we come to a different understanding of inspiration. Walter Ray, when his stuff came out, he had this Glendale meeting where he presented it, and one of the statements came back: Ellen White has used their authors more than we had first known, something like that. But it still never reached the degree. There's that he assumed. And a friend of mine did extensive work on Desire of Ages. We both kind of collaborated on it to look at certain things. And he pointed me to the some statements that were being circulated, and he went around and cleaned them up because he gave him the evidence that it wasn't true. Walter Ray, God rest his soul, he's been dead for several years now, did not do careful research on this matter. He noticed some similarities. The first similarities that he noted, he would send to the White Estate, and at the time, the director of the White Estate would thank him for his contributions, kind of shrug his shoulders, but appreciative, because Walter Ray had done a lot of work with Ellen White's writings, had made his own little compilations and sold them on the side, on the Old Testament characters and Daniel and Revelation and so on. So he thanked him for it, but the similarities that he was finding were not like strong verbal similarity. It's just he somehow assumed that nobody else had ever written on the life of Christ in a similar fashion. And so he was comparing the life of Christ with Alfred Edersheim. Do you have that in your library?
No.
Alfred Edersheim? It's a wonderful resource, because this is a Jewish scholar who looked at history and brought in helpful background information. It's annotated multiple ways. It's got footnotes, it's got side notes, it's got appendixes. It's very, very academic. And so this was what he presented as these astounding similarities at first. And I've looked at those, and they're telling the same Bible story. You've got to hit the same points. And I have found like 2 or 3 times where she may have used some phrasing from Edersheim to make a point. One of these kind of thought gem like things, only it's very minimal. It's very minimal. And so this is the kind of stuff that he was sending in at first, and the director of the White Estate was making a presentation that he happened to be present, and he said, "I don't much see similarity," and it goaded Walter Ray. It's like he's minimizing my work. And so he started working with my friend Bruce Weaver. That's the name. Bruce and I and Ron Graybill and Judd Lake were all on a podcast where we talked about giving credit. Walter Ray never gave Bruce credit for the examples that are in his book. But those were the examples that he brought to Glendale that the administrators had looked at and said, well, there's more than we had seen before. But they're in Patriarchs and Prophets, Desire of Ages, different books where Ellen White used some thought gems. They were accents. Well, Walter Ray suddenly assumed that the whole of the book was just, taken from other sources, much like the scholar may assume. But I don't think that stands up to the truth. So it kind of reminds me of a story I heard from a presenter. This guy is coming home from work and he sees a cat on the side of the road that's got mange, and maybe he sees another one, but he bursts into his house and he announces, all the cats in the neighborhood have mange. Based on a very small sampling, he overstated the case. And I believe that's what Walter Ray did. There were some significant finds that could be isolated, but he went on to say that 75 to 90% of Desire of Ages came from other sources. And that's way off.
Well,
That's way off.
would you think it would be a poor example to say, well, in the Bible, you have First and Second Chronicles, and a lot of those stories are very, very similar to what we read in First and Second Kings. Or if you read the Gospel of Mark, and then you read the Gospel of Matthew, and you read Luke, they're so similar. Luke must have plagiarized off of Matthew, or he must have
plagiarized. Matthew and Luke cannibalized Mark. 90% of Mark is used in the other Gospels.
Right.
Now, was there something wrong with that? Was there something nefarious with that? Absolutely not.
Right, right.
Okay, so
but that seems to me like an obvious kind of response.
You should recognize
so
it.
Why would it be a problem for someone to say, well, if there's some other source that may have expressed things in a true way? Because I had always understood that Ellen White, the content as a whole, for example, of Desire of Ages or Great Controversy as a whole, it's unique. It's a unique whole.
Yes.
But she may use these other sources. And I have an art background because I have a bachelor's in fine art. And I said, well, in art, you have a collage. You take a piece of this,
right.
You take a piece of that, and you make a unique whole, and it's not considered plagiarism. So how come, if Ellen White were guilty of plagiarism, how come, or maybe I'm wrong about this, has somebody that specializes legally, I guess a lawyer or something who specializes in that, how come they've never said, yes, she is a plagiarist? Has that ever happened?
No specialist has ever said that. In fact, you may have read the report that came out that was contracted for them to do a study, and he came to the conclusion that it was well within the limits of fair use of other material.
It was like a Catholic.
Right.
A Catholic, was it a lawyer? I don't know what the correct.
That specialized in copyright and materials. So that's really not the issue, because it was not illegal how she did it. It was common. I did some when I was doing my book on the Sabbath, I did a follow-up book on the Sabbath, and I started reading historians that were dealing with people that kept the Sabbath through the centuries. And I would run into historians who used each other's material. It's obvious. I mean, they would borrow from one another, and it was assumed. Like I said, Hannah actually says in his notes that, well, if there are some insights that I've got, you could look to so-and-so or so-and-so, but I'm not going to put in any references. Others, like Daniel March, the one that I told you that she got these beautiful little thought gems from, he would actually put in a quotation with quotation marks and never tell you where he got it. That just was not part of the way they did things. And so there's this progressive change of how they wrote. Ellen White was well within the medium at the time, and she was not aware of this advancing change in expectation. But when she was made aware with Great Controversy, for example, I think the observant reader would have known from the get-go, long before she included any comments about using sources, that she was obviously using sources, because there were, and let me pull the book off the shelf here. This is the Spirit of Prophecy, Volume 4.
Okay.
And it is the pre-Great Controversy. In fact, if you look at the title in it, it says the Great Controversy. So this is I don't know if it's 75% of the current Great Controversy, but it's something close there. And it was published as a part of a series, but also as a standalone volume. And I have one of those in my library back here. The standalone, it's the same volume like that. But I started looking through it, and I would see, well, like here, just, I don't know if I can hold it up so you can see it, but here is a chapter on Luther, and you can see quotation marks.
Okay.
Obviously, she's quoting large segments. And then look over here. Look above my finger. What's that?
It's hard to, I'll take your word for it.
That's ...
Okay.
What does ... mean?
That there's more to go.
Yeah. So it's saying that this is a quotation, and they skipped some sentences to kind of condense it.
Okay.
So anybody reading this is looking at that, and then I found other instances where it talks about such and such a priest said such and such, and then what he said is in quotation marks, or references to others. This is I did this in a video, so it kind of goes through that. But so it should have been obvious that she was using sources openly.
Well, like I said, if the writer of Chronicles or the writer of Matthew, obviously Matthew or Luke were using Mark, and some scholars would say there was a Q
right, source.
So
yeah.
they were using these sources. They were quoting from these sources. So wouldn't we say, well, that's what we see right in the Bible?
Exactly. And there's a source under that source. In fact, when you were comparing 1st and 2nd Samuel and with the Chronicles, or Kings with the Chronicles, but they will say, and the rest of the deeds of such and such a king, are they not in the annals of so and so, or in the prophecy of Iddo the prophet, or whatever? So without saying it overtly, they're telling you they use sources to tell the history.
Right.
Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? So if you're dealing with history, why wouldn't you? Well, I guess there's some people that didn't get it. I mean, what was obvious to me when I started looking at it as an observer, I mean, I can't say that I'm always observant, because somebody can drive a car to our church for months, and you ask me what kind of car they drive, and I don't pay attention to that, but I can see ... All right. So we all are blind to certain things, right? But so when people didn't understand it, so she put in the upgrade to this, which was the 1888 Great Controversy, she has a author's preface where she describes how she used sources and condensed it into to be able to tell this story. Okay, so she's done that. Well, in about 1907, they were still using the same plates to print the book, and the only changes, or maybe they used different illustrations or something. But by 1911, They said, you know, people expect references to be put in a book these days. She said, oh, well, by all means, put in the references.